Welcome back to the FivesSquared podcast with your host, Tim Fives. Hope everyone's having a great day. Got a great interview with Ryan McShane from the HR Evolution, and hope you guys all enjoyed that. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll find you next week.
You are listening to the FivesSquared podcast, the podcast where we bring you tips for your business and your life. Our goal is to leave you smarter with ideas, wisdom, tools, and entertained. The FivesSquared podcast is produced weekly for your enrichment. Come back often and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. You can also follow me on Twitter at FivesSquared and Facebook. All the links are in the show notes. Now let's get started with your host, business consultant, executive coach, and founder of FivesSquared, Tim Fives.
Welcome back to the FivesSquared podcast with your host, Tim Fives. What? So, we have a fantastic guest today. Why don't you introduce yourself real quick here?
Thanks for having me, Tim. I'm Ryan McShane. I'm the president and CEO of HR Evolution, where we evolve the why and the way we work.
Fantastic. So, Ryan, I've been meeting semi-regularly over the summer and whatnot, and there's a lot of synergies and things. And what I really appreciate about our conversations is how much we think alike, which is probably a little scary. It's like, oh, really? Yeah, you think that too?
When you find someone as twisted as you, hold on to them.
Yeah. So why don't you just tell us why you're put on this earth?
That's a great question. Wow. And what a powerful one to start off with. That's a question that I think that I've always tried to ask at every stage of my life, and that's an answer that's evolved over time.
Sure.
And I think that's the most exciting aspect, is that the answer has evolved over time. Had you asked me in high school what my purpose in life was,
ladies,
it was, it was the weekend. It was all about hanging out with the friends and the partying and all that good stuff. I would say college was similar to that. And then once I got out into my career, I knew that I wanted to make a difference through the role of human resources. And, I came from an environment where, you would sit down every evening at dinner and talk about the day. And traditionally, the talk was about what occurred at work. And so I'd hear mom and dad talk about work. And typically it was like, wow, man, if this is what work's like, I'm not sure I want to get into this.
You just reminded me of this as it just, the thought just popped into my head, because I had the similar growing up. Everybody sits down at the kitchen table and sits down. And I remember as a little kid, probably 4 or 5 years old, running up to my dad every time he came home and be like, "Did you get fired today?"
Oh, wow.
And you put that in context of what was probably happening in the back end of those conversations that as a little kid you're picking up on was how miserable his day was, or what the traumatic events were, or how much he disliked his boss or whatever. And it's kind of like, you kind of wonder how those situations formed you, without even knowing it happened. But that was... Thanks for the blast from the past.
Okay. And it was no different for holidays, because I would get together, the grandparents, the aunts and uncles and everything, and they owned a bus company. That bus company served the school. So every time we'd get together for the holidays, we'd talk about the buses and all the issues with the buses and the routes and the, challenges and the administration and things like that. And of course, it was never about all the wonderful things and how many people we serve and the difference we make.
Right.
It's all about the challenges, the problems, the headaches.
Yeah.
And so I thought, wow, we all have to work. I don't know too many people that are independently wealthy. But we all have to go and, work to be able to provide for our families. But I'll be darned if it has to be a miserable kind of experience.
I agree. I think that's one of the big things that we agree on.
And I think that's what drove me ultimately, is, and what my purpose is to see the silver lining, to see the fulfillment, to see maybe what we've been doing and promoting in terms of preparation for life has not necessarily been coherent with what is in the best interest for us as humans.
Yeah, and we were just talking earlier about the class I gave about emotional intelligence the other day at the college, and it was interesting to me when you had the class come in and you're like, all right, what are some fundamental truths, like universal laws that apply across the board? And they're all like, well, death, taxes, people suck, and life's unfair, and you know, and it was just a litany of kind of, this is how I see the world. And then you start to go back and look at, well, okay, I'm not going to dispute whether those things are true or not. I don't think they are true, but let's go on the other side of the fence and say, what are some real truths, right? Like, what are those things? And it's like, people are good, and they're like, no, they're not. And so there's this statistic out there that talks about 9 out of 10 people are predisposed to help you. And before I said that to them, I said, all right, so I walk over and I stab you, right? Or you're just bleeding out or whatever. How many people in the room are going to help you? And like everybody raised their hand, and I'm like, well, but y'all just said that 3 out of 10 people will help. Like 70% won't do anything. But all of you in here immediately come back, and then it's you come back to the truth that it's 9 out of 10 people, and they're like, well, no, well, how's that? And then so anyway, I'm going down in a rat hole, but that was to get them to think in different terms, because I'm a big believer that thought is what our thoughts are what we create. So
what do you think that is? Why do you think that while the reality is so different from what they're...
I think it's societal conditioning, right? Just like my story earlier about being a little kid and worried about at 4, 5, 6 years old if my dad got fired was just the tone and the language that was being used at the time, because even little kids, my son picks up on language, right? Like it's that powerful. So then that became my thought, and then a belief saying like, well, I hope he's not fired today. Yeah. But I think society does that, and I think society's rooted in fear. And but anyway, so what about your company? Like, what do you do? What's the thing that gives you the most passion? I know you do some teaching, and you got the business and.
So I've been very fortunate in that I've been in human resources for 20 plus years, and throughout that experience,
and he still has a full head of hair, for the record.
It's sliding back quickly, Tim. But within those experiences over the 20 years, it's been through the public sector, the private industry, startups, and nonprofits. So I've really had a wonderful exposure within the human resources function within very diverse climates and cultures. Yeah. And as a result of that, I've seen the dichotomy of difference between each one of those cultures. And then some of the similarities that span through all those cultures as well. And so as a result of that, I think it's enabled me to have a perspective that helps my clients in particular. So I serve small to medium-sized businesses in the area of HR consulting and leadership development and training. And then I also work hand in hand with individuals who may be in career transition. Yeah. So I tell you, my wheelhouse are the 40 to 60-somethings who have said, Ryan, I've been there, I've done that, and I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
Yeah, and we've had some great conversations on that, because that's one of the places we overlap. And, I think what's interesting, even though I would say our tactics probably vary a little bit, I think the mission of getting people into a role that's fulfilling is one of the guideposts for both of us, because that's there's nothing worse than being miserable in your job. Absolutely. There's absolutely, having been there, speaking from experience.
Absolutely. And to that point, I don't know that there's a lot of attention paid to who we are and how that aligns with the environment that we choose for a career. Yeah. There's so much attention paid to what technical areas that you have an interest in and exploring those interests, but not so much consideration of how that will apply to your work-life balance, how that will apply to how you operate within the world. And so that's really interesting to me, too, to see that disparity of what we're conditioned for, what we're prepared for.
Yeah. And I wonder, because I've had this conversation before, I wonder if that stems even all the way back into school with your guidance counselors.
Very much so.
And I think they're all good people. I'm not that, but I think they do a disservice to a point by not addressing the bigger picture.
So, understanding that who we are precedes anything that what we do. I think we're such an action-based society that we're always putting the action before the being. And in so doing, we come to understand later on down the road that the mistake of doing that. It's cutting off the nose despite the face.
Well,
in many cases.
right, and that was one of the points I was making with the kids at the college the other day was what is success, right? Like, and because and I think this is where society does us a huge disservice, saying like, well, success is flashy cars and big homes, and look at these celebrities and all of this, and we're programmed with it whether we know it or not, and then that becomes the American dream. Versus, how about joy and peace? How about not happiness, because I think happiness is fleeting, and I think but that joy that I'm here to serve, or I'm at peace with what I'm at, so I can deal with whatever life throws at me and whatnot.
And to that point, I was watching a podcast last night that paid special homage to the notion of power.
Uh-huh.
And the fact that we've been conditioned around power dynamics to a great extent. Of, when you interact with someone, are you asserting your power at all times? Is that how you relate to people, by assertion of power? Or, as you had indicated, there is no assertion of power. We're all equal, and how can we serve one another?
Right.
So we have an environment where we're conditioned around these power dynamics, yet we know intuitively in our heart of hearts that once we operate collaboratively, not in a way of manipulation and taking an advantage of someone, that everyone benefits.
Right, absolutely, and this podcast could be forever. But this is great. I think because when you operate from a position of power, what are you really doing? Right, you're establishing some level of fear within the other person.
That's right.
And one of my core tenets, I told the kids this, is that I think fear is the enemy of humanity.
You're right.
So and that's what this power broker system, and you can look at what's going on in Washington, and I don't care what political affiliation people have, but that's all it is. It's power and fear. And if you look at whatever somebody's saying, they're trying to get people on their side through the use of fear mongering, and it's this whole tax thing. I don't know if it's good or bad, and quite frankly, I'd like lower taxes, and that's all I really care about. But when I listen to this stuff, it's all like, well, but it's not a tax cut. The middle class is going to get a tax. It's going to increase their taxes, and it's like, is it? But the point of that illustration, it's all fear.
Mm-hmm. It's
all fear. It's like, I want you on my side in driving fear. So anyway, fear sucks. It's the agent of the devil. Okay. So, we have a bunch of topics, and we obviously won't cover them all. I hope you'll come back. But today we're going to talk, I know you're giving a talk in Vegas coming up. Mm-hmm. Pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, it really is.
So why don't we talk about that? And I think, one of the things, because this is one of the talks that I give is on Millennial, so maybe I'll learn something on the Millennial, would you say, engagement solutions?
Yeah.
Yeah, did I get that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So a big part of the Millennial Engagement Solution is examination of the different demographics that are in the workforce currently. Mm-hmm. And I think it behooves us to understand what demographics currently operate within the workforce, and then what are their common value sets in order to know best how to motivate, communicate, and interact with those demographics.
And so for my research, this is going to be hugely important because this millennial generation is quickly outpacing the workforce, right? From just a sheer number of percentage of bodies and percentage as the boomers and Gen Xers start to retire out. Yeah. This is the next generation that's taking over the leadership and the key roles.
Well, the current number of projections are by 2020, 2/3 of the workforce will be millennials. By 2025, 75% of the workforce will be millennials. So that's
awesome.
That is.
So for the record, I have a great millennial working for me. I've had really good experience with millennials. I have not witnessed the societal norms of things, but I know that the truth is somewhere in the middle. But it's always good. I always equate this coming back to as I guess a Gen Xer. They just renamed us in that gap years.
Yeah.
But whatever. Where the boomers didn't like us, right? And that's kind of the mentality that I think society's put on the millennials.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think my take on this, and I'd be interested in yours, is it's all about how do we leverage their strengths, right? Because there are differences and there are things, and as leaders, as technology and society evolves, we need to embrace that evolution. and change our management styles to empower this next generation. So
no doubt about it. And I think, it goes back to the messaging that we hear through the media, with the fear mongering. If the focus is on the differences, then that's what we'll see.
Right.
But if the focus is on the similarities and what is our purpose, why are we here as an organization? Why are we here as team players? And how do we align your skills, your capabilities to achieving the overall mission and vision? And unfortunately, it's not seen or broken down in that kind of sense all too often. Again, there are power dynamics as I'm the boss, this is how I want you to serve me and my notion versus the overall purpose of the organization. So that's some of the challenges. I mean, you hear things like, I don't need millennials texting instead of building relationships. You get that kind of impression. I'm not going to hire someone who's likely to retire in a year or two. So that might be another reverse discrimination where we're looking at someone of a senior generation or veteran or baby boomer. I prefer to hire people who are close to my own age, some people consider. We need to understand each other and communicate with each other. So there's not a willingness there to transcend some of the demographics in terms of their preferred communication styles. You've got the old sayings, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, so there's biases towards that. Just the same as retraining someone over 40 takes too long. Maybe I want someone younger.
That hurts a little bit. That hurts. I was just like, wait a minute, I'm over 40.
Can you believe that age protection starts at the age of 40? That doesn't seem right.
I still feel like I'm 22.
Exactly. Exactly.
I do have a 50-year-old body, but whatever. We'll get into that later. Next podcast.
But the scary reality of the numbers and what we're dealing with is the fact that boomers are retiring, and about 1 every 6 seconds, according to research. And so there's not enough in Generation X, our generation, to fill all those vacated positions. There's 78 million in baby boomers in the workforce, and then there's only 60 million in Generation X. So you can see that there's a wide gap to the tune of 18 million. Plus, all the while, there's being additional jobs added to the economy. So
which is good news.
Bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
It's good news. We also have to consider the robotic factor and how much, to what extent robots may replace a lot of our work.
So that's interesting, because I've been watching that trend in AI and all this, and it'd be interesting to get your take. I know we're going to have this little rat hole on AI for a minute, but in robots. But what do you think the impact of that is going to be on industry and jobs in HR going forward?
I think the impact is on a great deal of retraining and refocus. No matter whether robotics and AI will be utilized to the extent that it's believed to, we're going to have to look at how we approach maintaining AI, how we approach the decision making and the policy and procedure that are the structures that we put into AI to run our organizations. I think there needs to be a great deal of address and attention to privacy issues and protection issues around AI. And I think that's going to be the predominant conversation around AI is privacy these days.
So overall, do you see it as a positive or a negative for the workforce?
I see it as a huge challenge, and I don't know that I would cap it as a positive or negative. I think it's a change.
Yeah, that's fair.
We're constantly changing and evolving, and let's make sure that the evolution that we're participating in is in our best interest for humanity. And that's my bigger concern. Is are we doing these things with the hopes of growth without really paying attention to how we're growing?
Well,
what is the impact?
Right,
of that
that's
growth?
the whole law of unintended consequences,
Indeed.
right?
Well said.
No, it's interesting because I kind of fall in that camp. I think it's good on some days, sometimes, and then I'm like, well, wait a minute. But all right. So keep going on the millennials. Well, I'm gonna write that down as another topic for us to discuss.
So the difference in the millennials, and I think there's a lot of stereotypes regarding millennials, and I've mentioned a couple already. But it's to the extent that we buy into these stereotypes and really believe these stereotypes that could diminish our interaction and relationships with these different generations. And I've talked with people that have said, very clearly, hey, I don't want to hire these slacker, apathetic millennials. I want to hire someone who is very driven. And so you've got a dichotomy of value systems between the generations too. The boomers were the ones that said, hey man, we live to work. It's all about title, prestige, and money, and accumulation of wealth. Whereas Gen X, it's much more about work-life balance, and millennials, even more so. There's much more of a focus on purpose, on altruistic conventions and driving altruistic purposes and fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a movement in the right direction. But at the same time, I think we're struggling to wrap our arms around how do we leverage that in benefit of everyone.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing, I think the apathetic slacker stereotype is kind of misplaced, right? So if you take the other things that you just said, they're altruistic, they want some flexibility. I don't think any of those things are bad because, quite frankly, I can relate to that. But I don't think that makes somebody apathetic. And I think what we're doing is we're taking things that maybe we don't understand and relabeling them with a stereotype to make ourselves feel better. Well, they want to go out and clean up garbage or do whatever, I don't know, whatever altruistic thing they want, or they want to save the world with green energy. But that doesn't make them lazy. Like, that doesn't make them, and I think the issue comes down to, as Gen Xers or Boomers, we don't know how to relate to that, so we label it as, well, they're lazy.
I think that's a really good point, because they're motivated by things that we are not necessarily motivated by or been conditioned to be motivated by.
Right.
And so as a result of that, I think, you've got some arm throwing up in the air, like, what do we do with these folks?
Right.
They're outside of what we understand to be manipulated by and responsive to. And so we've got to change our dynamics and how we think about how we motivate this generation and how we think about how we're going to operate with and collaborate with this generation.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah. To that point, I think there's a lot of major trends that are happening in the workforce, and I think demographics is just one aspect of the major or mega trends, as I refer to them, in the workforce that are shaping our workforce. I think leadership is another big component of that. And you can tie the leadership in with the generations as well, because for a great deal of time, we've been operating from leadership models that are much more authoritarian in nature. And what I mean by authoritarian is basically, I'm in a position of authority and power, and you must comply and listen to me based on my position of authority. And so there's that blind acceptance or compliance. And that's not something that's really bought into by the millennial generation. It's more of why or prove it, type of thing. There's not as much blind acceptance of, yes, you're right, because you are in an authority position. It's more of, let's make sure that I see it the same way that you do.
Right.
And so we've got a generation now that subscribes much more so to a servant leadership model. And so that authoritarian of command and control, top down, do what I tell you because I'm your boss, is lost on this generation.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because when I do the leadership training and things, one of the things that we come out with is, how are you leveraging people's strengths? How are you empowering people to help you make decisions? So I kind of get the authoritating, the hierarchy thing, because at some point, they're accountable for those decisions at that level. Mm-hmm. Okay, I get it. But that doesn't mean that you are a dictator for that level, right? You know what I mean? So you come back, and then it's like, well, how do you engage and empower your team so that you have the best information to make your decisions that represents the whole instead of what you think, right? Because I think that's pervasive no matter with or without the millennials coming in. I think that exacerbates that command and control style. But
I would agree.
And, once you can leverage that, now you're tapping into what a leader is versus a manager, right?
Very much so. And I think I see that as a great positive. With the sheer numbers of the millennials, much like the sheer numbers of the boomers who reshaped and redefined how we work today, I see that millennials will do the same. And if that's in the direction of more altruism, if that's in the direction to more servant leadership, being more predominant in our workforce rather than the authoritarian model of leadership, I think it's a wonderful thing. And that will help evolve our workforce in general.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Very good. Anything else on this? Is that...
I think I could probably talk about millennials forever and a day,
yeah.
and the different generations. I think what's interesting is when you start to consider what is the solution. What we know the problems, we know the challenges. What are the solutions associated with ensuring that we all kind of work together and work from our commonalities instead of our differences? And that's where you start to touch to the principles of why we work. Is there a higher purpose to what we're doing? Do we operate from a standpoint of a stakeholder orientation or a shareholder orientation? Do we consciously plan how we want to interact with one another as a workforce?
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
Do we, and from that standpoint, do we consciously design our culture and our leadership modalities? And I think that attention to how we want to interact internally bleeds out into how we serve the people that we serve.
Absolutely, but I think this goes well beyond millennials.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you look in, it's like, I think the latest statistic, you might have more updated information than I do, is like 70-75% of the workforce hates their jobs. And I think that's why they hate their jobs. I think that's an excellent point. So then it gets exacerbated when you bring some, at least the people that hate their jobs now are kind of conditioned to the system.
Yeah.
But now you got this new group coming in that's almost rebelling against it and saying, well, we're not going to take this.
Indeed. And based on powers and numbers, they may have the influence to change
that. So, I mean, and I know this is one of the things that I appreciate about working with you is the fact that it's getting the people in the roles that are fulfilling for them in career transition. And I would say without question, every career transition client I've had has not hated the work.
Yeah.
They've hated the environment.
Yes.
And the environment is created by people.
Absolutely.
And it's everything what you just said. So, it's like, all right, well, now the goal is to find, in some cases, a less worse environment.
Yes.
And then, or find them to take the time to find an environment that suits them. But,
to that point, if we have statistics that 75% of the workforce is dissatisfied with their job, or they're not fulfilled in their job, I think we really need to pay attention to that as a society. I mean, there's something obviously broke. When you look at that from the standpoint of engagement levels, and 60% of the workforce is disengaged, and there's about 15% that are actively disengaged, which by definition states that they sabotage their workforce. They sabotage their employers as a result of their active disengagement.
Oh, yeah.
So, when you step back and look at it, employers are paying people to sabotage them because of how they're being treated. Again, why aren't we stepping back and looking at this and saying, something's broken, let's do something about it?
I just had another thought popped into my head. Because of this whole tax thing, right? Like, let's lower taxes, a great thing. I think everybody should have more. But that's going to grow more jobs, right? And it's going to be good for the economy. Okay, and I think everybody can agree on that principle. Most people, maybe. All right, 90%, whatever. But my point is that what would the impact be if you took the issue we just talked about with dissatisfied employees and figured out how to get them engaged, how this economy would grow?
Oh,
I mean, it would make this tax bump. If you agree, for the sake of argument, if you agree that this tax thing will do everything it's going to do, and grow the GDP to 5% growth or whatever, I think addressing the real problem of employee engagement this economy would skyrocket.
No question.
Any economy would skyrocket.
No question about it. Because typically the lack of engagement comes down to the say and how work is accomplished.
Yeah.
And so, the freedom and creativity that is enabled through being able to say how you want to perform the work enables so much more capability than working within a defined structure and system that may not be necessarily conducive to your work style. And so you think about that in terms of the millennial generation of, hey, you know what, give me the assignment, I'll do it at 3 a.m., I'll have it done faster than you ever expected, and it'll be on your desk in the morning. But I don't have to sit in that office for 5 to 6 hours to prove to you that I'm working.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because Devin works here and he's been on the podcast before, so my listeners know Devin. But that's exactly it. So I've had the good fortune to work for some really good people, right? And one of the guys, when I was working, came in. It was over at York International. I had a great manager there, and of course I didn't realize this until well after I left there. But I was always in the mindset of, oh, I can do that. Like I was always a hard charger, type A. I'm going to crush it.
Yeah.
But we were putting up this huge project, and I'm like, this is what I've done. Like I was always relying on the past achievements to justify my role, right? And he just sat me down. We're in there, and I'm all huffy and puffy, and I'm being an arrogant little bastard, and he just like, yeah, and he's like, Tim, I don't, and I'll never forget this. He said, Tim, I don't care what you've done. I care about what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And so fortunately for me, that was early on in my career, but it kind of just stopped me in my tracks. Like it's like, I get it, and then that progressed where he's like, and I don't care. Once I got the lead on that project, which turned into a phenomenal program, he's like, I also don't care how you do it. He's like, here's your thresholds. Like this is what has to happen. And now you're within the corporate framework of funding and all this. But he's like, you've got to do these things. And they were tall bars. He's like, but I can't pretend to tell you how to do this because it had never been done before.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that I take forward is like even working now with Devin, I don't care where you work. I'd like you here because I get lonely. And I really appreciate that he makes the coffee. But no, in seriousness, it's like he's like, hey, I want to go to the gym. Go to the gym.
Yeah.
Go do this because But here's the expectation: these things need to get done. I don't care where you do it. I'd like you here to help me out and do things, and he does. But there's no time clock here. We don't punch that. And
I really see that as a great positive because, for the organizations that operate based on the fact that, hey, I see you sitting at your desk, you look like you're stressed out, so you must be really working hard.
Yeah.
Versus someone who is very focused on the outcomes. I think that's definitely a move in the right direction.
Yeah.
We're focused on the right things.
Yeah. But I'm even going to say though, even though we're doing that, there's some days where I'm like, oh, where is he? Right, I'm changing my thing to be like, okay, stuff's done, everything's good, we're all right, and
that's a good point.
So it's not a natural. Even now, having what I thought was doing this, now when we're really doing this, there is a challenge to get over the hump of being like, no, he runs all our social media stuff, right? So this is another funny story because I go in there, I'm like, oh, you're on Facebook again. Oh wait, it's your job. Never mind. But it's just the conditioning that I even have, and I think that's something that I work with leaders. You have to be self-aware because I go back and I'm like, oh right, it's all good, we're good, and not let myself go down a rabbit hole on that. So it's.
You brought up something that's near and dear to me is the self-awareness for leaders. That emotional intelligence is just so critical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you can check out the Emotional Intelligence podcast
there you go.
that we just did the other day. So for all the listeners, but this has been great. We're right on time, and let's wrap it up, and we'll get you back for some of the other ones and go from there.
I would love to. That would be wonderful. I think we have wonderful opportunities ahead of us to reform how we see work.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of what drives me. You asked the original question, what am I put on this planet for? And I took the time and the effort to really deeply reflect on what that means to me. And that's where the title of my organization came from.
Yeah, I love it.
HR Evolution.
I like the fact that you changed it because I'm like, that's impressive. So.
Yeah, I think we're all trying to grow. We're all trying to evolve to our higher potential, whatever that may be. and how we can contribute to that within the workforce can lead to wonderfully systemic things where we're not operating from fear, but we're operating more from a standpoint of love and collaboration and fulfillment.
Yeah, and I'm going to close with this because that's great, and that's exactly how I closed the class the other day. Was you can look at life out of two lenses: scarcity and abundance.
Yeah.
And your success in life is going to depend on which side of that you fall.
Very much so.
Ryan,
it's been an honor.
It's been fantastic. Well, I can't wait to have you back, and have a wonderful trip to Vegas and your speech. We wish you the best.
I appreciate it.
We'll have you back in a couple of weeks when you're back.
Thank you. I would love that.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to the show with your host, Tim Fives. We hope you will pass along our web address, FivesSquared.com, to your friends and colleagues. Be sure to check out our archives section on our website for previous podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at FivesSquared or follow us on Facebook. This has been a FivesSquared production. Join us next time for another edition of the FivesSquared podcast.